Okay, hi everybody. This is just a quick tutorial, a recap of what's required for our assessment based on what was discussed in the last tutorial. I just wanted to map out for you how we would usually go about this process in professional practice for planning for a project, for the layout of a major document, be it a development application or any other documents that we prepare for clients. And this is just a process that I would go through usually, but I thought I'd apply it to our assessment and see if that helps you guys in working out what you need to do for your deliverables. So basically I've just used a roll of trace paper and I've just pulled off the number of sheets that I think that we'll have in our assessment. So for this assessment, you'll recall that I said that we now only have 5 pages, not 6. Number 6 was the co-design and engagement plan, and we no longer have that as part of the assessment because of the change to timetables. Okay, so for this assessment, the first requirement is the cover sheet. So the cover sheet is usually fairly straightforward. You'll see for this assessment that I've said that it needs to include a title block. That will also include having your assessment name and date, student ID number, unit name, and a photograph of the project site. So if I was basically planning how I would lay out this page, I might just take that straight tone away as well. Basically this will be your A3 page. Down the bottom you would have some form of title block that will be consistent throughout your entire assessment. That will likely include those things that we just spoke about. So it's probably going to have the date, the student ID, and probably your sheet number. So in this case, for our assessment, we're calling that sheet 1. It'll also have the project name, which in our instance is country as a classroom. And we're calling this analysis and planning. And then you'll also usually have what this particular page is. Obviously this is the cover, so we don't usually need to state it, but for the instance of this assessment we'll just list it down the bottom there. The other thing that I've said for this assessment is it needs to have a picture of the project site. Because this is the cover page, you just want to have something that's sort of captivating. It might be a picture that just sort of comes across halfway of your project site. You might have a couple of projects, but just something that says that this is the cover page basically of the deliverable for this assessment. Just going to put some white paper under there so that you guys can see that a bit more clearly. Okay, so that's your cover page basically done. So your second sheet is your desktop analysis overview. So we've spoken about this one a few times, so you will continue to need to have your title block down the bottom. So the first thing you do, whether you're doing this by hand or by InDesign, Photoshop, you'll have that same information, so date, student ID, the title again, so country as a classroom, and analysis and planning. And this sheet is called your desktop analysis overview. Okay, so on this sheet we spoke about that you must include a synopsis of the following background documents and highlight the key points or takeaway messages from the Law and Social Justice Precinct Strategic Brief, the QUT Blueprint, and the AILA Reconciliation Plan. So what I'd suggest is that you might want a photo that sort of pertains to each of those documents. So you might have a photo up the top. It could be the front cover of those documents, or it might be something that sort of is a relatable image. If you're getting an image from the internet, you need to reference where that image came from, or it can be an image that you've taken yourself. And then you're going to have a synopsis, or a 1 to 2 paragraphs about what each of those documents' key points were. So the first document might be the AILA Reconciliation Action Plan. The second might be the QUT Blueprint, and the third one might be the Law and Social Justice Precinct Strategic Brief. Now if you have a look at the key criteria for your marking, If you end up with just having a few bullet points, that will be sufficient, but you'll get a lower grade. The more developed that this content is into paragraphs and with sort of thorough explanations of what each of these documents is about, the higher your grade will be to reflect that. So you want to get as much detail and depth as possible when you're talking about these documents. Now, I know the Law and Social Justice Precinct Strategic Brief was only available in class, but remember, for all of these documents there is the summary bullet points that are on Blackboard. So understanding that we aren't going to have any future classes for this unit that are face-to-face, I'm happy for this summary here to basically be paragraphs that are drawn out from the bullet points that are currently on Blackboard. So unfortunately, I have checked today and the facilities management team still aren't comfortable with that confidential document being made digitally available. So this summary here needs to be paragraphs built out of the bullet points which are on Blackboard currently. So that's so that one there is sheet 2. Okay, so sheet 3 is your map of country. So just like your other pages, the first thing you need down the bottom is your title block. I'm not going to write it out each time. You'll obviously know that the main thing that you're updating is your title that you have down here. So this one is your map of country. You'll still have all your dates and student number information in sheet number 3. And up here you'll probably need a scale bar. If you're using a to scale map, I think for this map we've said that it doesn't need to be to scale, but if you did want to have a scale bar, this is the area that that would go. You will definitely need, regardless of whether you've done it to scale or not, a north arrow. And you can find some designs for what a north arrow looks like. If you just do some Googling, you can be as creative as you want with that. Okay, so your map of country could be at a scale that is as close as the QUT Gardens Point site and its surrounds, or as wide as sort of southeast Queensland, depending on what information you have about your area. I've suggested previously that you might just want to do some Googling of what some of the key sites are in Brisbane. I expect you guys to do your own research. If you do jump onto different websites, you can read information about different areas of Brisbane that had significance to the First Nations groups that existed in this landscape. For example, this one talks about very sort of inner Brisbane. It's talking about the Wesley Hospital, the Regatta Hotel, Coronation Drive. So those landscapes prior to European settlement had significance for various Turrbal groups that occupied their landscape. So I suggest that you do your research about which landscapes are significant, and then that's what you're going to map onto this map that you're going to create of Brisbane. So your map of Brisbane could be at any scale, as I've just mentioned. It's likely to be sort of like the Brisbane coastline, the Brisbane River meandering through the sort of southern edge. You might go out as far as having some of the islands. And you want to really talk about who the First Nations groups are that occupy that landscape and where those significant sites are. So we've said that you would need to identify traditional owner groups in and around Brisbane, where QUT's 2 campuses are located, and areas that have Indigenous cultural significance based on your own research. So hypothetically, and this is indicative only, this is not a true example, it might be that you identify that everything to the north of the river is significant to Turrbal, and that everything to the south of the river was significant to Yagara, and that there were different groups out in the islands that those landscapes were significant to. So that's one of your first criteria, is to identify the traditional owner groups in and around Brisbane. You're then probably going to mark where the QUT campuses are. So there's one in the city, so this might be QUT Gardens Point, and there's one out in the suburbs, which is QUT Calvin Grove. And really that's just to give a relationship to where our sites are that we're doing design work for in relation to the country that we're working on. And then the last criteria was to know areas that have Indigenous cultural significance based on your research. So it might be that you might note Musgrave Park, you might note Mount Cootha, you might note at various different spots throughout Brisbane and the surrounds that have significance to different indigenous mob or indigenous clans. Now, just noting those sites will get you quite a low grade on the marking criteria. So for example, if you say there's a site here and that this site is Musgrave Park, but that's all you note for me, that doesn't tell me much about the depth of information that you understand about why this country is significant. So adding some additional information will increase the likelihood that you will get a higher grade. So the grading scale is about depth of knowledge and depth of understanding about the different landscapes you're talking about. Now, it might be that you do this on the plan like I've done here, or it might be that you say that this is site A, site B, site C, and then you might have information up the top about site A, site B, site C, etc. So it's up to you whether you use the format where you have a legend or whether you note the information on the plan directly. Okay, so that's sheet 3, which is your map of country. So sheet 4 is your site analysis plan. So again, at the bottom of your site analysis plan will be your title block. Your site analysis plan does need to be to scale, so you will need to have a scale bar along the top here. That will be critical, and part of the marking will consider that. You will need to have a north arrow pointing in the direction that north is. Name, student ID, the name of the project, the name of the plan, which in this case is your site analysis plan. Okay, and so this plan must consider analysing those items listed on Zimmerman's site evaluation checklist, but must include as a minimum prevailing wind, sunshade, shadowing, vegetated areas, access, pedestrian circulation, vehicle circulation, noise and odours, views and vistas, land use, structures and buildings, and drainage high points and low points. So for this plan, I would suggest that you probably might like to use an 1 to 500 A3 size plan. That might give you a starting base of how you would start to map this information. Remember, we were doing this in the first couple of weeks when we were going out to site and looking at what the different site analysis features were from our observations. So we've said that we need to note the various buildings, so you're going to want to have your main building. So X block is obviously our project site, Y block, Old Government House, we've got Kidney Lawn, we've got the Botanic Gardens, which sits up and around our site. We've got a cul-de-sac road that connects up behind our site with an island, and then we've got Main Drive, which comes in and around into the campus. We've also got an access way between these two buildings of X and Y block. So for example, and this again is indicative only, this isn't true to our site, the prevailing wind for this site may be coming, if this was north, may be coming from the south, so we may note that the prevailing wind was something like this. That helps us work out where we need to plan for buildings and structures to stop us being exposed to the wind. We might want to consider sun and shade shadowing. So for example, if this is north and the sun rises in the east and it sets in the west, we know that a majority of the sun's shadowing is cast this direction. So the shadowing from our buildings would likely fall this way across the landscape currently. And again, that gives us indications of where we should and shouldn't be designing elements into the landscape. Vegetated areas, so we've noted the Botanic Gardens, BCC Botanic Gardens. Other vegetated areas, for example, there are some key trees, I believe, in Kidney Lawn. Access. Access is access in and out of buildings, so at the moment there's access in and out of Gardens Point Theatre. I believe you can access into the Y Block Cafe, something like this. So key access points. Pedestrian circulation, you'll want to have a consistent graphic, so it might be that pedestrian circulation is a dotted line, and you'll need to mark all of these things on your legend Vehicular circulation might be a larger dashed line to note where vehicles can and cannot move throughout the site. And then we've also got noise and odours. So we know we've got a cafe in here, so it's quite possible that this area may have odours that are produced. Noise, it's possible that we have pleasant noises that come from the botanic gardens, such as birds, etc. It may also be that where we have our vehicle roads, we have noise from vehicles. We've got our land uses, so for example Brisbane City Council had the botanic gardens and river stage. We've got QUT's boundary, which sort of buffers around the outside of our site. Of course, again, just indicative. Drainage high points and low points, so we need to have a look at the levels. It might be that we notice that there are sumps which stormwater drain to throughout certain areas of the site, and we know that the lowest point on the site is likely to be down in the gardens, which is where the contours grade away to. So this is where water would run to when there's high rainfall events. So your site analysis should pick up all of that type of information. Okay, and your last plan, which is your affordance analysis plan, should also be to scale. And I'd highly recommend that you probably want to use the same scale that you used for your site analysis plan. If you are using trace paper to plan out what your drawings might be, you can do that quite quickly. So again, you're going to want to have your title block down the bottom, and then just mark out your key buildings and features onto your plan. So here's X block. Of course, when you draw these final versions up of your drawings, they are to be of a high quality that would be worthy of giving to a client, like the development applications that you'll see in the week 9 outlines. So basically give yourself a bit of a base, show where the gardens are, show where those main roads are. That'll give you a base to work from. So our affordance analysis plan was to capture the information that we've been collecting over the various weeks, from weeks 1 to 4. So the first affordances that we're supposed to be noting are the general affordance opportunities. So general affordance opportunities might be the likes of picnic benches. It might be that there are park benches along Main Drive, and there might be a picnic bench that affords people the opportunity to sit and rest in certain parts of the landscape. It might be that there are drinking fountains out the front of certain buildings which afford people the opportunity to stop and have a drink if it's a hot day, for example. So our general affordances, which we'll call up here general affordances, might all be marked as individual items. So it might be that we have bench seats, picnic tables, drinking fountains, and something else. So any other general affordances you see in the landscape. The next one was universal access. So this is where we had Tyke, our Paralympian, come and talk to us about universal access. We talked about access for people with prams, people in wheelchairs, people with visual impairments, so tactiles and handrails and all of those things that afford all humans the opportunity to equally access a site. So marking our layer of universal access affordances, we may mark all of these, for example, with a square. So wherever we see a square on our plan is where there is a universal access opportunity. So for example, I believe there's a ramp that goes into Gardens Point Theatre. There are access points along by the cafe which afford a wheelchair to have access. It may be that you note that there are handrails up the staircase which have universal access assistance for people who need to hold on to a handrail. So going back through your notes and looking at what universal access is and marking all of those items with a square, and then you may want to number them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then list them out of what they are. So again, the greater the depth of information about what it is that you're seeing and what it is that you're noting on your plan, the higher the grades will be. So if you just tell me that there are squares everywhere and these are all the universal access points, but don't tell me what they are, then it's harder for us to give to understand your reasoning for what those different aspects are. Okay, so the next one is CPTED, so crime prevention through environmental design. CPTED affordances, which you might mark all as a triangle, for example. And again, these are just indicative. Like the other plans, you could note this information on each plan or note it in the legend. That's up to you. That's your choice how you want to represent that information. So CPTED might be that there is an emergency call beacon in the middle of Kidney Lawn. It might be that there are security cameras on the edge of every building or out in the landscape. It might be that surrounding Government House there are actual additional security features that have been included that are specific to Government House, for example bollards or the like to stop vehicles driving up to them. So again, you could list these all 1, 2, 3, A, B, C, or you could list exactly what they are on your plan. So the last one is wayfinding affordances. So wayfinding affordances you might mark as a circle, for example. Wayfinding. And everywhere there is a circle on the plan is where you've noticed a wayfinding affordance in the landscape. So it might be that there is signage all down Main Drive. There's also signage on the front of most of these buildings. Wherever that wayfinding and signage is, needs to be marked as your wayfinding layer of affordance analysis. So what you should see, I mean, you can color code these so that they stand out more clearly. You could have multiple legends, a legend for each of your different types of affordances. However you can best articulate that the site currently as it stands affords certain opportunities for people to read the landscape or move through the landscape is what you're trying to capture on your affordance analysis plan. Okay, and so that one is sheet 5. So with sheet 6 no longer being required for this assessment due to some of the changes enforced by COVID-19, that's basically all of your requirements for assessment 1. I suggest that you go through this exercise of mapping out all your drawings. Once you've mapped out what each of your drawings is going to have on it, it's going to be a lot easier to go through and compile your assessment into a really beautiful looking document that articulates all of your analysis that's been undertaken for this project and that is compelling enough that you would be willing to give it to a client or a business to show that you understand this particular site. Okay, so I hope that helps. If you have any questions, we're going to be running tutorial at the same time as usual. I'll be sending out some information about how tutorials will be run and how best we're going to communicate with you in this new online platform, and I hope that's really helpful. Okay guys, take care, stay healthy, and I'll speak with you all soon.